Fact or fiction, which is the truth? The week 1 performances, the week 2 performances, or is it somewhere in the middle? That's what we're going to talk about today on RotoViz OT as we dive into 2 weeks of information. We did talk earlier this week looking at week 2 specifically, diving into a number of things, Jamar Chase without Joe Burrow moving forward, how Troy Franklin's breakout may look the rest of the season, James Cook, the wide receivers, lots of fun topics of conversation that we did run through. So we are going to dive in, Shawn, to this kind of idea of which week is kind of the truth and what should we do with that information moving forward. The first player up, Shawn, that I want to touch on, and I think I probably know the direction we'll go here with this one, but it was Derrick Henry. Week 1 looked like the greatest running back of all time. Week 2, nothing really happened against the Cleveland Browns. And it was interesting. They obviously get the win very easy in this one. But there was some comments from the Cleveland Browns, defense before this during the week, kind of playing down Henry's impact on what will happen in the game. Well, he didn't have an impact, but the Browns still got absolutely crushed. But Derrick Henry, Shawn, sometimes we can see this in games where maybe his game scripted out a little bit, not necessarily in games where they win convincingly like this. Maybe if it's a game where they need to lean on the pass more, and we might have seen it like a Justice Hill in there in the past in some of these situations. But Derrick Henry, which is real? What are we going to see moving forward here from Henry?
So, Colm, I don't think either of these two performances are indicative at all of what we're going to get. The 2025 season from him is going to be fantastic. One of the things that I pointed out pretty consistently in all the big gorilla pieces, right, those massive breakdowns, was this sort of disconnect between his expected points and his actual points. The fantasy points over expected are just insane. But even when you put those two things together, it's tricky at the price that he was going at. Now, I think it makes plenty of sense if you want to say, I think Derrick Henry is A, just going to score a lot of points, and then B, could have those points bunched in such a way that he helps you win the sprint, even if the overall total isn't that high. And I'm going to be able to draft well enough with the rest of my picks that my team is going to be awesome. I don't have any problem with that at all. But we do get like the highest of highs and the lowest of lows within the first 2 weeks. One of the things that was kind of interesting about last season is that you have this stretch from week 8 to week 15, and that's basically half the year, right, where he averaged 14.6 points per game. Again, a score that, you can certainly put in your lineup, but not one that's difference making from the 1-2 turn. And there was a low week in there, there was a high week in there, but there were also 5 weeks where he was between 12.5 and 14.7, a pretty narrow band. And I think that this iteration of the Ravens offense, where they have so many opportunities to quick strike through the air, and Lamar Jackson is playing so well and will run himself. And one of the interesting things about this was that the Browns also shut down Lamar Jackson in the running game. You're going to get more of these games with Derrick Henry in that sort of 14 point per game range. And the question is that enough for you based on how you structured the rest of your team?
Yeah, you mentioned Lamar Jackson, and overall the team rushed 21 times for 45 yards. So really did get completely shut down in that situation. Shawn, I have some tight ends I'm going to sprinkle in here because I was going to factor this in, but Mark Andrews, 3 targets, 1 reception for 2 yards. This is all in a situation where there's no Isaiah Likely at the moment. We're in situations where the team here has put up 41 points. Is it a case that Mark Andrews is just completely done at this point? Last season did start off slow as well for him, but 2 receptions on 4 targets in the first 2 games, and the team has put up 81 points across those 2 games.
Yeah, I don't know that he's done, but he's become an unnecessary piece in Baltimore. So when you're looking at these types of players and you're thinking about someone like a Zach Ertz, for example, where, Mark Andrews is probably still as good or better than Ertz, but Ertz is really necessary to what the Commanders are doing because I mean, the Commanders kind of skirted by on how good Daniels was last season. They make the offseason addition of Debo. Now, Debo does get in the end zone late in week 2, but you can see the problem there against an elite defense like the Packers, where he's not really a difference maker. Terry McLaurin, sort of a one-dimensional deep threat, who you've now spent a ton of money on, despite the fact that he wasn't willing to practice throughout the offseason, and you don't have the weapons there. So Ertz is really important. Mark Andrews is not important to what the Baltimore Ravens are wanting to do. You have Zay Flowers, an absolutely electric receiver. If you put him with Jaden Daniels, he'd be catching 10 passes for 120 yards virtually every game. I mean, it's hilarious. The whole DeAndre Hopkins thing is basically just a mess with the rest of the league. Then you have Devontae Walker, who, I mean, we're still a long way from Walker living up to the hype that I had for him last offseason as a rookie. And yet, I mean, Devontae Walker was a very reasonable and interesting prospect. And as he develops, gives them another guy who is a speed merchant and almost impossible to cover within the context of everything else that's going on. I mean, the Ravens are sort of the opposite of the Chiefs, where the Chiefs are like, we can't threaten you anywhere. What will Patrick Mahomes do in this environment? The Ravens are like, we are making you cover all of these guys who are freakishly athletic, and you have to account for Lamar Jackson. What are you going to do? Within that context, Mark Andrews is not someone the defense has to account for, but he's also not someone who the offense even has to go to when the other guys are being accounted for. Even in a game where Derrick Henry gets shut down, the Ravens had no need to move on to Mark Andrews. So, I mean, the answer is basically that he is done, at least in this mix. And yet you look at what Walker did in this game. Are there going to be some games the rest of the season where Mark Andrews has 2 catches for 2 touchdowns and is still viable in fantasy, because touchdowns are very important, especially if your exposure to fantasy is mostly best ball? I mean, I think those games probably still come, although likely
do
could
come,
push him
but
even more to the fringes.
Yeah, they do come, but the problem is if you are starting him every week, I think he becomes a situational start. And if it's a case that you have alternative options, you kind of have to go in that direction moving forward. It felt like the Ravens were just like getting Walker and Wallace into the end zone. Some of the guys that we would have liked and talked about coming out of college, they both get in here for a combined 3 touchdowns. Tez Walker 2 for 26 and 2 touchdowns. The DeAndre Hopkins thing is interesting. He does get tackled at the 1-yard line in this one as well on another deep reception. He now has 4 targets, 4 receptions for 2 touchdowns, and almost could have had a third touchdown, as I mentioned there as well. So they are using him, though, situationally, only in for 10 snaps in this one. So basically they have a rotation of characters, but Mark Andrews is also one of them, and that means that they're very hard to put any of those guys into your starting lineup. Shawn, Kenneth Walker, we touched on it a little bit on the previous show, but he gets outsnapped here again, basically by Kenneth Walker. But the actual story in terms of production is drastically different. 105 yards and a touchdown for Walker, and Charbonnet just ran for the 10 yards. Charbonnet 36 snaps to 23. He had 15 carries to 13. And ran 12 routes to the 6. But are we, again, this is a backfield, looks like it's flipped. We could have been concerned, obviously, and I was a little bit concerned after week 1 with how that played out. But this took a very big shift in the opposite direction. And the next backfield we're going to talk about took a very big shift in the Giants as well. But Kenneth Walker, what are we thinking here moving forward? And was week 1 maybe a little bit of working him back from that off season where there is some missing training camp elements and injury status?
Yeah, you can only do what you can do, and so from that perspective, when week 1 makes sense. I get pretty frustrated with these teams, and not the teams, the players, right? Where you have the full off season to work through different things, and you're in a race for week 1, whether that's contract related or injury related in a situation where the injury occurred a long time ago. Now, on some of these things, they're just chronic, and that's the concern you have with Kenneth Walker, where if you have some of these problems that really stem back to last year, but they're bubbling up again from doing things like playing some football, I mean, how do you balance that? Because you have to be able to practice some, both to execute anything when you're out there, but also just to have the strength, the conditioning, the explosiveness that an NFL player has to have. If you're Kenneth Walker and you spend your days on the couch because you have to stay off your foot, I mean, how do you stay as the transformer quality? We were talking about Kenneth Walker last year as essentially a super soldier with, positive, not, negative connotations for that, where you're just of a very larger than life type of character. And in this game, he was all of that, right? He would run toward the line, see that the hole is closed. In those situations, Zach Charbonnet takes the safe route, walks into the line, gets tackled. There's nowhere to go there. I mean, someone like Charbonnet is not going to be able to like push that line back. Walker goes around, breaks these plays for 40 yards. He's got a size, speed. It's interesting because we have a variety of NFL running backs right now who are big guys, but they're speed backs. And I mean, one of the things that just is so fascinating to track was Saquon Barkley is basically a small speed back in a big back's body. Jonathan Taylor, the same thing. Derrick Henry, basically the same thing. Although, again, tackling someone like Derrick Henry once he gets going is going to be a lot of work. But I mean, Walker's burst it's absolutely elite. There are only 4, 5, 6 other guys in the NFL who have that. And when he's healthy, it's utterly difference making. They do not win this game without what he did, those big plays. He was 13 for 105 with a long of 20, which means he continually racked up big gains in this week 2 performance. I mean, he's the guy who should be going, 109, 110 every season, should be scoring 19 points per game, should be the most fun player in football to watch. If we can just get through the injuries. The thing I wrote in the rest of season rankings was just how bad he looked in week 1 and that this was going to go one of two directions in a hurry. He was either going to be benched almost completely and utterly irrelevant, or you would have the turn where it would bounce back. You would get the real version of Kenneth Walker, and suddenly Charbonnet's the guy in trouble. The problem here for fantasy managers, Colm, which I think is infuriating because of what this offense looks like it could be, and because both guys are pretty cool, is that we could get a lack of definition throughout the season that makes two very fun players, I mean, not unstartable. You're going to have enough injuries. You're going to have enough flex spots. You're going to have enough buys. I mean, you're going to have to be playing these players a lot, but there's going to be a lot of frustration that also comes with it.
The next two I'm going to pair together, Shawn, and I might pair some of these together, kind of they fit into similar categories, but Cam Skattebo for the New York Giants, a little bit involved in week 1, but not very much. But this week it's 11 carries for 45 and a touchdown, that being a goal line carry after some of those strong runs that I mentioned on the show earlier this week. We had Tyrone Tracy 5 for 15. Tracy led the way in terms of targets, 5 targets, 4 receptions for 36, and then we had 3 for 2 and 14 yards for Skattebo. The other one, Shawn, that I wanted to mention in here was Tuten, and I thought Travis Etienne again looked very good this week for the Jaguars, but obviously with Tank Bigsby traded between week 1 and week 2, and that led to more opportunities for Bhayshul, Tuten, and both of these guys had really nice receiving touchdowns. They make a move after the catch, but I thought Tuten looked extremely good on his. I don't expect it to be the way maybe I was projecting it in the preseason, where it's a clear path for him to become the starting running back. I think Etienne is playing really, really well, and kind of what we may have thought he would have played like 1 or 2 seasons ago, but it has cleared a complete pathway for him now as the RB2 to have some standalone value on a weekly basis for the Jaguars. Both Skattebo and Tuten, obviously they've kind of moved up the rankings in a slightly different way of their depth chart, but I was kind of surprised as to how quickly Skattebo kind of flipped the script from week 1 to week 2 with the Giants, versus I kind of felt like this was where it would go post the Tank Bigsby trade for Tuten. Are you kind of feeling confident that this is what we see moving forward with the Giants leaning on Skattebo, or do you think it could be a little bit of a case of just that's what they went with this week.
Yeah, it's going to be both of those things, but I'm pretty optimistic. The problem is that we now have absolutely no idea what to expect from the Giants because of what we just got from Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson has been one of the worst players in football for the last 5 years, and yet you give him the right pieces. He's willing to throw 60-yard bombs and Malik Neighbors and Wan'Dale Robinson can make that work.
And Shawn, I wanted to make sure on that show that we praised him, and you and Ben kind of talked very positively about him. The one thing we know that Russell Wilson can throw is, deep contested catches. Like, he can throw those. I have no doubt that he can throw them. It's like the rest of the offense.
Yeah, I can't run anything else. But those long passes are super valuable. So that part is exciting for Neighbors and company. And it also does potentially make it a little bit more difficult to defend the run. So this game here was super weird because Devin Singletary takes the first touch and has a 4-yard gain.
Shawn, this game had 41 points in the fourth quarter. 41.
It had 41 points in the fourth quarter. The Devin Singletary touch to start the game seems pretty irrelevant. But my point here is that you have Singletary touch the ball first. You have a pass to Neighbors, and then you have Skattebo also touch the ball before Tyrone Tracy. But it's not like Tracy was benched or out of the picture, because then they come back and they throw a pass to Tracy, they give a carry to Tracy, they give another carry to Tracy, and another carry to Tracy. And he's not super effective with the last two of those, but the way that they opened the game, it seemed very much like we're going to let all three guys touch it and we're going to play a hot hand. Now, Singletary doesn't really get enough of an opportunity to prove that he might have had the hot hand, but as soon as you get Skattebo generating these highlight runs, he had a relatively big play that was called back on a penalty. And this is a guy who is absolutely made for fantasy football, in part because he's a high-value touch machine who's also made for what coaches love. And you don't know that that's going to stick. Tyrone Tracy has the speed. There may be some situations where Skattebo does go through stretches where his efficiency is very low, that you're averaging 2.5 yards per carry over a meaningful enough stretch that it's problematic. But within this offense, it's very exciting to see what he potentially would do. He just has the 2 receptions on the 3 targets in this game. I think he's going to have games where he has 6 or 7 targets when he completely pushes Tracy to the side. Then you're absolutely off to the races. But you look at this game here, and when it comes at the same time that you have the Wilson breakout, they lose, but there's so much more momentum now going forward with this offense. And it takes them back to where they were in training camp before those injuries kind of cropped up. And about the time that the injury cropped up for Skattebo, you had this report that it's not even a backfield competition, that the Giants anticipate using Tracy as not just as the lead back, but the bell cow, and things are being built around him. That comes at the same time that everyone else covering the Giants is saying that Skattebo is clearly the best running back on this team. And when you have the prospect profiles and the contrast there, when you have the camp reports that this guy is instantly in the NFL, what he was in college, what he was last year at Arizona State, I think you have to default to the bulk of the evidence as opposed to this situation where insiders or reporters are saying that Tracy is going to be the guy, in part because Skattebo is just better and more multifaceted and just more fun for coaches, regardless of what it is, fun or not for us. But again, it's fun. And so I think we're going to get more of him. I think we're going to get those high value touches, those goal line carries, those receptions. The Giants, though, are not a reliable team when you think about the coaches, the Russell Wilson situation. We could have everybody fired and a new quarterback in a matter of weeks.
Let's stick with the rookie running back, Shawn. The next 2 up here is gauging your level of concern. So we have Treveyon Henderson, we have RJ Harvey. Treveyon Henderson this week had 19 snaps. It is pretty hard on 19 snaps, Shawn, to get yourself 3 holding penalties. So that wasn't... If you're in a holding penalties point situation in your fantasy league, you would have done well this week. But Henderson not been factored in, Stevenson looking pretty good overall, and his usage been much stronger obviously this week. And then RJ Harvey, again, Dobbins is doing a nice job in there, but I'm surprised at how little they have factored Harvey in so far, and factor in as well that Tyler Boutte played 22% of the snaps in week 2. Hit me with your concern level for RJ Harvey and Henderson. I felt that they would both be backs that would come in week 1 and pretty much, be your starter. And you wouldn't really have concerns about starting them. But I do think if you have Henderson or Harvey in, your redraft formats, that you have to be considering your options ahead of week 3 here.
Yeah, it was nightmarish. It was cataclysmic. The biggest concerns are related to price, right? Because what we paid for these guys means that you do need production, and you're probably not set up. Both you need them to score, and your rosters are not set up with contingencies in the right way in most cases. Now, I say that, and a lot of the RV specific types of drafters are going to have people like Skattebo, are going to have people like Tuten, and that does potentially give you some coverage. One of the reasons that you draft a lot of guys with a wide range of outcome and a lot of upside are that when you're wrong, then you have other pieces who can do more than just sit there, right? When you draft guys in rounds 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 who can't possibly impact your team if your team is good, then you're wasting those picks. So from that perspective, hopefully you are set with some difference makers. Some of the guys that I had mentioned in sort of the earlier version of the guys you have to draft, Jordan Mason, Jalen Warren, those guys are not lighting the world on fire, but will get you across in some circumstances. We're maybe a couple more weeks away from, certainly if James Conner gets banged up at all, especially, but Trey Benson has looked good. Maybe you get some opportunity there. A lot of RV drafters should have him on the roster. Henderson and Harvey are still easily the most talented backs on their rosters. J.K. Dobbins is going to be good, but not good enough for where the Broncos want to go. Ramondre Stevenson has these flashes, but basically has been a replacement-ish type of back for multiple seasons. The Patriots, Henderson has the bad fortune of playing a really poor game against a terrible defense. So the contrast becomes exaggerated because Ramondre Stevenson looks pretty good. If the Patriots are going to get where they want to go, which probably isn't even the playoffs this season, but you just build into an environment where in 2026, your team is good, right? You have Drake May, you've built the identity you want, you've got the culture you want, you're building up your defensive depth and talent. You get a receiver who can maybe impact the game in some way, and you're off to the races. Well, Treveyon Henderson, who was the standout in camp and was the guy everybody was talking about as being the one difference-making piece for the Patriots, the coaching staff has arguably done a pretty poor job here in that they have undercut him and set him up to fail through the first 2 weeks. Now, it's not entirely on them. He has to play a lot better, right? We talked even after week 1 where, where's the dynamism? Where is the vision and the intent to get upfield, to gain yards, to score points, all of those types of things? He has to play better. So we'll see how that happens. You're hoping that the coaching staff has this idea about their potential best player, that they want to get him going, as opposed to the sort of macho mindset of let's see what you have and let's see if you can rebound from this. And we're going to bury you. We're going to emphasize Ramondre Stevenson. Are you tough enough to handle it? Hopefully he is tough enough to handle it, and hopefully that would also work. But you kind of hope that they take a better approach that works better for them and better for him and just gets him out there scoring. These guys are going to score, but again, where we drafted them, we needed that to be in weeks 3, 4, 5, not weeks 8, 9, 10, 11, which now it very much looks like could be the case.
Yeah, I agree. And there's obviously a level of concern. If you do have I know in week 3 in these situations, if I have a roster with, say, a Harvey or a Henderson and Skattebo, I think I'm going to be leaning the Skattebo direction. Is that the way that you would be kind of going entering week 3?
I think so. I mean, one of the issues that you kind of run into here that is very valid is you could end up kind of chasing the last week's points for guys who we don't have a lot of definition on exactly how they're going to be used, and you can continue to get that wrong. The idea would still be that you've built a team overall that is so strong. You've got guys like Troy Franklin on your bench to give you receiver depth. You had the receiver depth in the first place to dominate the flexes, mostly through receiver. You have an elite tight end. Hopefully, it's not the case that you and I are in where that elite tight end was George Kittle. You have an elite QB. Hopefully it's not the case that elite QB was Jaden Daniels. There's only so much you can do with these injuries, which is one of the reasons that we mentioned. I mean, 2024 and 2025 are going to look different. You have some guys hurt that you didn't have last year. It's going to be tougher. You want to build a team that can dominate your league, can win in the playoffs. You want to get that bye. It's not something we're saying, just try and be in the top 6, make it in. Having to win an extra week is certainly not ideal, but you're trying to build the best team. This is the way to do it. I'm going to Cam Skattebo for this week if I have one of those two guys, but I want us all to understand that could end up being wrong. You could look at it next week and be like, oh, RJ Harvey and Treveyon Henderson did what Skattebo did the previous week. This is what we banked on. Skattebo turned back into a pumpkin, and now you have another week where you're pretty frustrated. Even with that being the case, these teams are built to be super teams as you go through the course of the year.
I would imagine, Shawn, if Cam Skattebo's seen a pumpkin, we are coming up to Halloween, he would just smash right through it. He would. He's not carving any pumpkins, he's just running through them. So talking of turning into pumpkins, though, we did have Keon Coleman this week, and we did talk about the Bills and James Cook, and I mentioned Josh Allen's issue with his nose and the blood and so on, and how that may have impacted the game plan and the rest of the way with a comfortable scoreline against the New York Jets. But he went, I thought he had a really strong game against Baltimore. And the first game of the season, he had 11 targets, 8 receptions for 112 and a touchdown. Obviously, that was a game where they were both neck and neck the entire way through to win that one. This week, he has 3 targets, 3 receptions for 26 yards. And the other player who didn't get in the end zone last week, but got in the end zone this week, but it was his only target, his only reception, was Kayshon Boutte. Gets 16 yards in a reception on a really nice catch on a play where the defensive back's kind of all over his back. Comes down with the ball in their win over Miami. He had 8 targets, 6 receptions, 103 in week 1. He was somebody that in any leagues that he was on waivers, I went pretty aggressively after to try and get onto the rosters and last week's waivers. But thoughts on both of those guys? And again, that kind of puts in that element of I'm sure there was a lot of people that did not start Keon Coleman in week 1. They chased it this week. They didn't get it. Gabe Davis was infamous for massive game a 0, massive game a 0. So Keon Coleman, Kayshon Boutte, any thoughts on those guys as we move forward here? Because I was very impressed by both of them in week 1.
Yeah, I think in some ways week 1 is a little bit better indicator of where they are within their team and what they're going to mean to their teams. But week 2 is gives you a better sense of what reasonable scores are going to be, or just how the structure of the teams is problematic. It was a lot of fun, even in this game where Keon Coleman doesn't really do much, to watch him run. For a big player, he is so smooth. And you even think back to this massive contrast that people, because it was very visually interesting. I mean, the contrast was stark. How he ran the gauntlet drill versus how Troy Franklin ran it. For a big guy, the smoothness, all of those things. He did have an additional play that would have gotten him yardage, but he commits. It was sort of unfortunate for him because the shove that he gave the Jets defensive back was very mild, but he caught him off balance. And so even though he barely pushed him, the Jets guy goes flying and you get an offensive pass interference. His game looks a little bit better if you add those points on. The concern that I had with Coleman, so you have 2 concerns with Coleman. They made him very difficult to draft, even at prices where you're like, I mean, this is a free shot at somebody who, if you're wrong, it will really hurt you, right? I mean, Keon Coleman is one of those guys where if you were going to be wrong, it could be disastrous. And you don't want to have like zero exposure to that in a situation where the price is just, I mean, so easy to pay occasionally. But with Coleman, you have these two elements of A, he wasn't really a very good prospect. And when guys who are mediocre prospects and then they come out in the range where he was drafted and don't really do much in year one, the breakout rates for them are very low. Now, that doesn't mean that that's going to determine how that works in the future, because you're dealing with sample sizes, obviously, that have all types of problems. But when you're seeing that just historically these guys don't break out, I think you want to take that at least somewhat seriously. It's actually more likely to have something like the Ladd McConkey situation, where you've got someone with a mixed prospect profile, but the team saw something. We know that McConkey actually had the really high yards per route in his final season, where again, it was a tiny sample, but they did have the good yards per route. They draft him. They need to use him. He looks really good right away. That's not a huge surprise. When the guys don't do it, when they're drafted where Coleman was drafted, it just doesn't tend to work out. And then you have the problem that we got in week 2, where you also have Khalil Shakir, a solid but not difference-making player. You have Josh Palmer, who in some ways is just a clone of Keon Coleman, not from a size athleticism perspective, but how we anticipate them being used. We could easily have been talking about Josh Palmer as the guy that you had to have, and Palmer even much less expensive after week 1. If things just break slightly differently and you get the touchdown for him and not for Coleman, right? You have these two tight ends who are very involved in week 2. I mean, one of the things that happened in week 2 that probably won't continue to happen is that they seem to really want to get Elijah Moore points, touchdowns, what have you, because he's a former member of the New York Jets. That's probably not something that continues. But the week 1 performance was an outlier, not so much even because of what Keon Coleman did, but because of what the Buffalo Bills had to do on offense, when what they have done since the coordinator change is much more what they did in week 2. And if you're Keon Coleman and the offense is going to be like the week 2 offense, it's just really hard to score enough points to be a consistent weekly start in fantasy, much less a league-winning type of piece. So week 2 is probably more what you can expect, more what his season will be like. But you can't completely rule out a player with his size, fluidity, combination, catching passes from Josh Allen with what the Bills paid for. And the other thing, and the reason why you have to look at all of these situations as being unique, is that it actually did look like Keon Coleman was going to break out as a rookie. And right when that was about to happen, he gets hurt. And so that's another situation where, yeah, you have an asterisk on top of asterisk, where it's, this guy is a unique player. We know it hasn't necessarily worked in the past, but you got to evaluate this guy for who he is. I don't think he's going to beat you if you don't have him. He's going to be tough to play if you do have him, but there probably will be more of those Gabe Davis types of weeks that you referenced where you actually do get the eruption.
The last couple of things to head on, Shawn. Sunday Night Football, I mentioned Mark Andrews earlier and asked if he was done. Somebody I was very optimistic for heading into the season is TJ Hockenson. And watching this one, Shawn, I had to question, has that injury actually zapped everything from TJ Hockenson in terms of, you mentioned the word a minute ago, fluidity. There was not much fluidity in this one. 3 targets, 1 reception for 12 yards. But just in general, when he's out on a route or how they're even using him, a lot of shallow stuff they're using him on. But like the defender is like draped on him at all times. I am extremely concerned for TJ Hockenson here moving forward. You know, obviously we talked a lot in the offseason about Addison being suspended for the opening 3 weeks of the season, how that opens up the door potentially for Hockenson. Well, obviously we have one more game of that suspension left, and then we have Jordan Addison back. We are going to see JJ McCarthy miss this upcoming week, and we'll see then how many weeks he misses moving forward. But TJ Hockenson, Shawn, somebody who was kind of below that elite tier of tight end, but still in a very expensive area, particularly in tight end premium. How concerned are you from what we've seen through 2 weeks?
I mean, you have to be pretty concerned, right? This is maybe the result of all the results through 2 weeks that I felt I saw coming the least. You can point to all of these different scenarios where you're like, yeah, I mean, I kind of got that wrong, or I wish I had played that slightly differently, or all of these things are coming true that I'd hoped for. I love how everything is going. And obviously it's a mix of those things. There aren't too many things that you look at and you're like, I just didn't see this as even being possible. And I guess even then, I wouldn't say that that's the case with Hockenson, because one of the things that we talked about with pricing Jefferson and Hockenson and Addison, and one of the reasons why we said draft Hockenson and draft Addison, because if you're wrong in round 6 or 7 or even later, depending on how your format values tight ends, if you're wrong on Addison, especially with the suspension discount, your team can survive that. If you're wrong on Justin Jefferson, I mean, you contrast where he is right now with like what a Malik Neighbors is doing, and you're like, you're just going to get destroyed. And the problem is that JJ McCarthy cannot play at all. The secondary problem, which...
And just on that, when you touched it, that was going to be what I was going to finish on, was the Jay McCarthy thing. So if you want to factor it in as well, but I don't know if you've seen, the pass charts or the next gen stats does a tracking of completed passes and so on a graph. But JJ McCarthy, not a big fan of throwing the ball to the left hand side of the field, and it felt like in this game the Atlanta Falcons were like, he can't do it, so they just kind of were able to shut them down based on how they could scheme the defense from that. I wasn't aware of that, coming into the season going to be a big issue, but when you're only using one side of the field, that's going to also limit the potential offense. And like, they were really bad in week 1 outside of Q4, and I thought that we were going to have a conversation today when this game's going on. It looks really bad. I'm like, we talked a lot last year about fourth quarter Bo Nix. Are we going to have fourth quarter JJ McCarthy? Well, the fact was that we just had 0 quarter JJ McCarthy in this one.
And sometimes that happens, right? But you don't want it to happen at home in what, again, was a very winnable game. I think you have to have a lot of humility with this. I do not necessarily... JJ McCarthy was one of those guys where I essentially approached the season from the perspective of, I think anything could happen, because he was on that team last year. And so it's not the same situation as Cam Ward, where there's so much information to have to process right away. Now, even the thing of just being hurt versus being out on the field is different. And so this is, again, apples and oranges. And with Patrick Mahomes, we kind of knew that it was going to happen, or to an extent it was going to happen, because as a rookie, he goes and plays in the week 18 game and eviscerates a pretty solid defense with backups. But this idea of you sit out the first year, you start year 2, and you can be off to the races like Mahomes was, I mean, that's obviously the 99th percentile outcome. You wouldn't expect that from McCarthy, but the Vikings have great talent at the skill positions, and they have a fantastic head coach. So it's possible that you would get some of that, because McCarthy is extremely athletic, and he's got a ton of arm talent. If by arm talent you mean, does the ball come out of your hand and people think, wow, I mean, this guy can really hurl it. It's a little bit different question of, is arm talent accuracy and an understanding of what's happening on the field? Now, obviously that's not necessarily arm talent. That's the processing part. And again, I just keep going back to the fact that McCarthy had some individual stats at Michigan that were encouraging. But if you are playing for the best team in the country and you're playing for an NFL head coach, and that coach will not let you throw the ball, I mean, that's a massive red flag. I mean, JJ McCarthy did not seem like someone who should be drafted in the first round, much less someone who should be drafted as though, I mean, the Vikings basically have no choice here. After you make that pick, you've got to give him a season and a half to prove that he can't play. Well, a season and a half for McCarthy destroys this crucial time period for Justin Jefferson, where he's trying to become the best wide receiver of all time. It takes out basically 2 seasons, obviously, for a Minnesota Vikings team that is probably the 6th or 7th best team in the NFL outside of quarterback. I mean, it's a complete and total disaster.
Well, it closes, the Vikings here, like, just if you look at just football wise, like in this division, you have the Lions, the Packers, and the Vikings, who realistically are competing for the division. I don't count the Bears, not specifically again after they lose again this week, but like it takes them completely out of like any Super Bowl window. You know, they realistically with their roster, they are in that area now where they could win that division and you know, try and chase a championship, but it's going to be hard unless there's a big step forward here from McCarthy's play. And again, he obviously missed all last season through injury, and unfortunately he does get rolled up on this one. Did look very, very painful at the time. And now that's, you know, going to be a case where he has a knee sprain and misses a couple of weeks at least. And these are all chances for his development. But again, the team now is, you know, going to be in a little bit of a hole probably when he gets back.
Yeah, it's tough because Carson Wentz is probably not a viable option.
But he may be better at this moment in time. Like we're seeing, and I know it's Carson Wentz, we're seeing like Mac Jones. We didn't get to him on any portion of the show, but you know, he's starting for the 49ers this week. And we're looking at like what's happening with the Jaguars and what's happening with Brian Thomas Jr. And is he in a better situation if Mac Jones is starting for the Jaguars? Mac Jones starts in this one, and you know, he gets Joanne Jennings going. He has a really nice touchdown pass to Christian McCaffrey. You know, he may then, when it gets like 3 weeks down the line, like the teams are like, well, Mac Jones can't do these couple of things, so we're going to put him into these bad situations where he makes mistakes and throws turnovers. But in like, you need a starter this week, Carson Wentz may be better for Justin Jefferson right now.
He's probably slightly better for the receivers. But I mean, the reason that Carson Wentz, who was a true MVP candidate, fell from that to someone who different teams are trading for and trying to make their sort of, you know, low cost or secondary savior to fall into clear backup status, and to then arguably even not preferred backup status, is that he's played QB so poorly. And individually, the one-offs you can probably discount. In the week 18 situation last year, where the Chiefs had all of their main players out and the Broncos, you know, need to win, and the Broncos crush them and embarrass them, and Wentz can barely throw a pass across the line of scrimmage, that's not being set up to succeed by the Chiefs, and I think you can throw that out. At the same time, I think the Chiefs are probably shocked at how uncompetitive he was there, and they were like, we've got to get over to Gardner Minshew for our backup so that if Mahomes misses some time, we have someone who can play a little bit of QB. I'm scared for all of these Viking shares because the Vikings are so much fun that Wentz is not only not the solution, but he could be in that sort of weird range where the Vikings are like, you know, do we need to extend the time that McCarthy is out? But I mean, for the Vikings, it has to be something a little bit like what we got with Bo Nix last year, right? Where Bo Nix had, I think, more glimpses in the first 2 weeks than what we got, certainly with McCarthy in week 2, but he was bad in the first 2 games last year. And everybody who hated Bo Nix was like, and we told you he couldn't play quarterback at the NFL level. What did you guys think was possibly going to happen? Well, what we thought was going to happen was that he would rebound and be really good, which he has then almost exclusively been since that point. If you're a JJ McCarthy fan, that's got to be your same thesis right here, right? Which is like, yeah, give him a couple of weeks, give him a little bit of grace, let him play some, and get Jordan Addison back out there, give him the full complement of weapons, and see what he can do. Now, this time period where you really needed to see what he can do, that gets pushed out. I mean, the injury is just another disaster upon what's happened these first 2 weeks, because you really wanted to see how he was going to bounce back from this terrible week 2 situation, because maybe he would have bounced back in a big way and they would have been off to the races.
The other part from that Vikings team, just to mention, Aaron Jones has a hamstring injury, so he's likely about to. Sometimes, you know, when you get a QB that's out and you're trying to kind of rescue the team through a couple of games, maybe you lean on the run. Well, that will only be Jordan Mason, it looks like, for the next couple of weeks. But that is where we're going to finish up this episode of RotoViz OT. Between the 2 episodes here, I think we covered a lot of ground. We obviously had Shawn and Ben doing Stealing Bananas with the instant recap edition as well over there, if you're looking for more week 2 content to set you up for the rest of the season. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on socials at Overtime Ireland. My co-host is Shawn Siegele. Check out his work up on rotoviz.com. Make sure you hit that subscribe button to get the podcast once they are available. And until we are back, have a good one.